Welcome to the 313 Men, Money, and Marriage podcast. This is the podcast where facts, logic, and reasoning are at the forefront of every conversation. I am your host, Andrew Johnson, and in today's episodes, we're going to be talking about child support. And I have three guests that are going to be on this particular episode. But before I bring them on, I just want to go over a couple of stats pertaining to child support. The first one is custodial mothers are more likely to have child support orders in place, 51% versus 41% for the fathers. 46% of custodial parents receive the full amount of child support. 24% get partial. Custodial fathers are more likely to receive non-cash support at 65% versus 56% for the mothers. Only 38% of Black custodial parents are awarded child support compared to 54% of white custodial parents. And lastly, African-American males are 20% of African-American males end up in prison or jail due to not being able to pay their child support versus 5% of whites. So with all those stats being put out there, I'm going to bring on my guests. First up, he's the host of the Born in Trouble podcast. Give it up for Mr. John X. John, what's up, brother?
What be going on? Now, Andrew,
what's up?
I know you have a serious podcast, unlike mine.
Yes, sir.
But you started this with something very serious. Yeah. You said facts, logic, and reason. And we're going to talk about child support.
It's supposed to be a left brain conversation, but this one we might have to stray off a little bit.
A little bit.
And our other guest will be, another one of our guests is going to be Mr. Robert Brooks. Mr. Brooks, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I dodged that child support bullet.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. He escaped. And last but not least, from the 313 area code, give it up for Mr. Grant Lancaster. Grant, what's up, brother?
What up, though? How you feel?
I'm doing good. I'm tariffs ain't killing you up there, are they?
Man, look, it's a different animal up here now, bro.
I can imagine. All right, we're going to get started. John, I want to start with you. I just want you to talk about how the child support system, how it basically works. And you were your child support order was in New York, correct?
It was.
Was your child support order in New York?
She wanted to start with me too.
So, yeah, we'll start with you. Can you tell us basically explain your story and basically what happened pertaining to your particular situation?
Well, I mean, it's been many years now, and the only reason why I can smile about this is because it's over. So that's like a very important thing to remember. But typical. I was with my ex, my son's mother, and I never really mentioned the fact that my daughter is my daughter. But there was my daughter involved in that situation too, and I raised her from the time that she was 6 months old. There was no father. Father was still, I've never seen or heard from him years later. And, when things went bad, being that I come from a family where we were old school, where we took care of our own. The understanding was that you take care of your kids. You make kids, you take care of them, you do everything you can. And even during the entire time when we were splitting up, I was like, listen, even if we're going to go in a different direction, we're still family. And she, in one ear, out the other, wasn't interested in any of that stuff. And at that time, let me be completely honest, we're talking about the 90s. And in the 90s, cats did what they had to do. I had a full-time job, but I was also, I won't lie, I did a little bit of street stuff too. As far as just the green and everything, nothing really heinous. And I always made sure that my kids had what they needed, because I was always taught that what your kids do, once you have kids, the first thing that you do is you take care of your kids, and your needs come second. So what that meant before child support, pre-child support was, you call me up and you need $100, you get $100. You call me up on Friday, and that was the normal day we were going to get paid. The money was going to come. Oh, I need $200. Well, guess what? You're getting $200. There was no pushback. There was no problems. It wasn't like one of those situations where I would be like, well, what you need this for? What you need that for? Because I mean, she was high maintenance. So, and if she wasn't happy, she wasn't going to let my kids be happy. But when it became apparent that I wasn't going for any of the other stuff, there was going to be no reconciliation. And mind you, it wasn't me that had ended the relationship alone. It was mainly her part and her actions and things like that. She decided that she was going to go to child support. And I told her, I said, listen, you go to child support, you're being foolish because I give you more than what they allow. And in New York State, what they allow is, I think it was 17% of your income. And not only did I give her 17% of my income,
Yeah, it was
I
17%
gave,
in New York.
yeah, I gave everything. They needed sneakers, they got sneakers. I had purchased the car. She drove away with the car, all good and everything. I let her have it. I got myself another vehicle. So she wasn't wanting for anything. But when I ended up in the courthouse, it was a completely different beast, and I wasn't prepared for that, honestly, because I went at it from a point of view that I'm going to be honest here. I have all these things. One thing I did do is that when she came and she got something from me, I did make her sign a receipt. And that was the first jokey part of this whole situation because when she would come, and it wasn't all the time, it wasn't for everything. I made her sign a receipt, but usually if it was that 175 that she was coming to get or that $200 she was coming to set, I had her sign a receipt. So, we go to court, and when I told her, I said, whatever they award you is what you're going to get and everything. So, like all this other stuff you're talking about, there's not going to be any extras, none of that other stuff. It's just like it is what it is. So I went into court, and the first thing that the judge said to me was, I said, well, I have receipts. I've been paying for this and that and this. And since the very, she said, you think I'm going to go through each and every one of your receipts? These receipts are worthless to me. They don't mean anything. I was like, what do you mean they don't mean anything? She's like, they don't mean anything to me. And she turned to her and she said, has he given you any money? And she said, straight face, under oath, no. So
Wow.
that was my first experience with the judge. And I was like, basically, they were like, well, obviously she was a good looking woman. And she was like, they were like, well, obviously, like they were making it seem like she was all beautiful. And I was like, look, what am I, chopped liver here? Like, like you think that I'm like chasing this woman down. I'm not chasing her down. I just want to see my kids. I want to take care of them. Not interested in any of the extracurriculars. And let's just say it didn't end up well for me. I walked out of there with an arrears of a couple of $1,000, dating back to the birth of my child, despite the fact that I had paid rent, I had paid for clothing, I pretty much paid for everything. And I walked out of there in a hole. But even with me being in a hole, based upon what I made on the books, it was still less than what I was giving her. And that was generally the beginning of the experience.
Grant, I'm gonna go to you and pretty much the same question. How was your situation pertaining to child support?
So unlike X, I never went to the court. So my oldest daughter, she lived with her mother. So when she was born, it was just us, working it out. And then there was the blow up, the inevitable blow up, and then all of a sudden it was, I'm gonna take you to court. Well, I told her that wouldn't be the greatest idea, but whatever you got to do. Because my goal was always to keep the courts out of my business. So in my mind, she went and talked to her sisters, and they told her, "You would be a fool if you took this man to court because you're gonna get less than what he gives you now." So she ended up not taking me to court. So it just cost me. But here's the caveat to it: in order for me to keep the peace, I had to eat whatever it was that she was serving up that day, right? If she wanted $200, I had to eat that. If she wanted $600, I had to eat that. You know what I mean? Like it didn't matter what it was, you know. And in my mind, because it was for my daughter, I was able to reconcile it that way. So I was able to avoid the court, but I mean, who knows how much it really cost me? You know what I mean? Or saved me, whichever way it went. And then with Lay, I have custody of my youngest daughter. So I've had her mother left us when she was 1. Well, she left this house when she was 1. And Lay and I have been here together ever since. So she'll turn 10 in June. So I never paid any child support for her. And her mother doesn't pay anything for her unless, if it's something that she wants to buy for her, she can do that, but she doesn't have any obligations for it necessarily.
Okay, now that's a good point you bring up, because a lot of times that's the case. A lot of times when men do get custody, the woman isn't put on child support. It's like usually they sort of get a pass on it. I
Yeah,
guess
nah.
and not
I,
necessarily blaming anyone or anything, but it just seems like sometimes they'll get a pass, and when they do that, is it fair? Or I won't use the word fair, but how do we rectify that? What I mean, how did you rectify it for you personally?
so for me, it was still the same thing. Just like I didn't want the courts in my business with my oldest daughter, I didn't want the courts in my business with Layla. So um, I wasn't gonna go and put her on the books. That just wasn't something that was gonna happen. So um, whatever we had our conversation. Look, whatever you're able to do, fine. If you unable to do, I'm never gonna stress you over it, because we're gonna be fine over here. You know, so it just worked out that way, and now she's moved on. She's got another couple kids. She's kind of doing her thing now, but Lay's still home with daddy.
Got it. The next thing I do want to talk about is co-parenting. Well, no, before I get to co-parenting, I want to talk about some of the stress levels of it. What was your stress level like going through the process of having to worry about going to court and child support and all that? Was it to the point where it was just so aggravating that you just wanted it to be over with, or what was your
I
thought
can speak
process
to
on that?
that. We're trying to make sure that they have everything that they need. Now, after that initial time when I went in and when I went back again, which of course I did go back when she felt like I had a better job and I should be paying more money, that was a different experience completely and totally. And at that point in time, I'm like, damn, I'm like, this judge, there's nothing I can do. I can't say anything or do anything with this judge. It's going to make her see exactly what it is. But what I can say is, though, something that you were talking to Grant about, as far as like once you get custody of the kids. See, the thing is that she was a, I don't like to say anyone is a bad person or talk about someone when they can't defend themselves. But let's just say that an incident occurred, and over time, I ended up getting custody of my son and partial custody of my daughter for a short period of time, but they shipped her out before she had a chance to actually stay. And when I went to that judge, because based upon what had happened, what had occurred, first of all, every woman in that court looked at her as if they could kill her, as if they could choke her, because she had been denying me visitation. I had been there for violation of visitation. And all these times she was telling all these tales about all this stuff. There's no documentation that showed anything or proved anything because it didn't happen. Stuff that she was talking about, but she knew the playbook. She knew the script. And when I went in there, the judge awarded me custody and she point blank asked me, she was like, what do you want to do? Do you want full custody? Do you want partial custody? What do you want to do? And I was like, well, despite everything that I've gone through, I won't be the same person that she is. And I want her to have the right to see her kid, to see her child. So she can have partial custody through me. And of course, they canceled all child support orders. And of course, my son came and lived with me. Canceled everything. They canceled the arrears on the account, which wasn't much, but there was a small arrears. And even that judge was like, when I saw that judge who had given me such a hard time, after she knew what had happened, she was damn near apologetic. I like to think that my experience kind of affected a lot of other men and how they were viewed. Because despite the fact that they really put me through the ringer, through the courthouse, really, and there's other stuff in between there that I didn't get into, but they really put me through the ringer. But each time I went in respectfully, I went in peacefully. I counseled other men that were outside, waiting for their cases. Hey, like, don't be yelling up and down this hallway at her. Just like you got to go through it. You got to let the process go through, and if it's what's meant to be, it's what's meant to be. But they asked me if I wanted to put child support on her, and I said no. There was no reason for me to do that. I didn't need it. I didn't need it. I took care of mine. Even though it was tragic and it was difficult for the amount of time, and this is up for the first decade, 11 years of my son's life. Eventually, I got to the other side. And it's important to know that. You got to keep your cool in these situations. In the end, yes, but I mean, in the interim,
so yours is a success. Yours is a success story for the most
it
part.
really is. It really is because, in the interim, a lot of these women are coached up on the system. So they tell you say he's violent, put the order of
Yes.
protection out. So they put the order of protections out. I don't know anything about this system. I don't know what the fuck it is, what it's supposed to be, what it is. Excuse my language. And it cost me jobs. It cost me one job in particular that was like a very good job at that point in time, about $70,000 a year. And this is back in 1993. And because because I had this temporary order, I didn't get the position. And I had went all the way through the whole process. And, I got the phone call after I went in to sign my papers that, they did this check. And I was like, hey, listen, this is not true. And they were like, well, unfortunately, it's our policy that we cannot employ you in that manner. So, yeah, I went through a difficult time with child support. I really did. And the thing is, I always say is that what people don't really realize about child support is that you're not punishing the man as much as you're punishing your child. Because what I could have done for them and the life I could have provided was basically cut. And that's something that you suffer through as a man, mostly in silence. Because I wasn't calling Rob or Grant and telling them all these things.
We focus, John, on in the child support system. A lot of times we're focusing on money, but we're not focusing on time, because the time is really the most important aspect of it. When we're looking at it, you don't get back time. Money is interchangeable, but you can't get back the time if a parent misses out on raising a child or told they can't see the child. We don't, you don't get that time back. It's permanently gone. I want to go to Mr. Brooks really quick because I just want to talk to him about co-parenting. Now, you didn't have a child support order in place in your situation, but you co-parented.
No, we didn't.
Can you
didn't have
explain
a
how that
child
went
support
down?
arrangement. We didn't have a child support arrangement. See, I knew, like, she had moved her mother in, her sister lived with us, and they were church people, and they were just that, her mother was that, oh, Suge, she honeyed and sugared everybody. I'd have got crushed in court. They'd have looked at my cocky ass and just started whipping me. So I was deathly afraid of going to court with them. But I used to always phrase it to her as like, look, my guy is $350 an hour. You get your person. If you want to go to court, you get your person, and we'll take the money that should be going into Macy's mouth and we'll put it in theirs. And fortunately, that was enough to sort of keep that conversation at bay. But I had open access pretty much to my daughter. I mean, my ex got lucky. I was very involved dad. So, I mean, I drove my daughter to school every day, which means I fed her breakfast on the way to school. We sent her to private school. We 50-50'd that. I also fed her dinner a couple nights a week. The arrangement was supposed to be that I drop her off at school and her mother picks her up. There were a lot of days in the winter during, when baseball season wasn't in, where I would just go and pick her up and take her to dinner and help her with her homework, whatever. I mean, I did all the college tours. So I was pretty heavily involved, and her mother didn't make it easy. most of the time. She did some of that female stuff that just doesn't really make sense. They often get, focused on their feelings. Like my only feeling was like, this is what's good for the child. Like, so I just stayed focused on, um, and like some of the other brothers said, I also knew if I had to give her child support, she was going to be coming back to me for the above and beyond. And you got to be really strong. And I knew I wasn't that guy, like, because my focus is on my daughter. If I had given her the whatever the court ordered and then she came back to me, we need $300 for this, I was going to give it because ultimately my daughter needed it. And I knew that she would blow the first money that I gave her. I knew she would blow on her. She had her mother and her sister in there, and they weren't doing nothing. They weren't paying for anything. She was basically carrying them. That's not my life. That's not my job. So that's why I didn't want to give her. That's one of the reasons why I didn't want to give her child support directly. I'm like, I'll just, I'll feed my daughter. I'll clothe my daughter. I'll take care of her needs directly. I'm not just handing you money for you to decide what to do with.
Got it. Grant, I want to ask you a quick question pertaining to the co-parenting. You said you had custody of your youngest daughter, but how did the
Correct.
co-parenting work with your oldest child?
So when she was born, I got on the fire department when she was 1, like shortly after her mother and I broke up. So my firefighting schedule at that time was work 24, off 24, work 24, and then I would be off 3 days. So I got a similar story to Rob, where I was always at the school, always taking her to school, always picking her up, always doing homework. You know what I mean? Like we just had because I had a lot of time. I wasn't working another job at the time. I was only doing the firefighting thing, so I had a lot of free time, and all of that free time I was able to spend with her. So we would drive to New York, we would drive to DC, we would drive to Kalamazoo, just go see my people. I take her away for those 3 days. Once a month, that 3 days is 5, so we'd go for 5 days or whenever. And it just allowed me more time with her. And I think, similar, right on point with what you said. The thing that is more valuable than the money that you give up is the time that you're able to spend with the kid. So, that to me, that's the biggest flaw in the child support kind of doctrine, is that, yeah, you give up all this money, or whatever amount of money you have to give up, but then you're not able to necessarily get the time to put in with the child to get the bond that you really need in order to be the dad that you want to be, or in some cases to be the mom that you want to be.
Yes, and that's the time aspect of it does play a role in it. As far as I really believe that that time is gone. I've seen situations where mothers will be very very strict
Mhm.
with the father pertaining to him being able to see the child. However, when things go left and say the child starts to maybe get out of control, then they'll bring him to you. And then
Hmm.
you're like, why are you doing this now after it's, snowballed into this person who is going to be a whole lot more difficult to deal with? We could have handled this 4, 5, 6 years ago, and we
Right.
wouldn't even be in this situation. So that's, I've seen that play out so many times where the mother will then come back after there's a problem or major catastrophe and then say, okay, now you can have a role in the child's life. Here, you want to take him for a little while, but it's it's not fair to the guy because, like I said earlier, it could have been taken care of a lot, in the past. Another
Right.
area thing I do want to talk about real quick is there's a misconception surrounding, especially African American men and child support, and not just child support, but taking care of their children in a co-parenting way. There's been multiple studies done stating that black men are actually the most involved fathers. And that's why I was listening to Robert and Grant's story, and John, that you guys were really playing an active role in raising your children, even though they technically weren't in the home. So what are your thoughts on that? John, I'll start with you. If you can give me about 60-second answer on that. What are your thoughts on that as African-American men being involved in their child's life at a higher rate than other races are?
When things went wrong in the house, the kids, it was always the phone call was made to me, hey, speak to your kids. I may not know where they are, but it's speak to your kids. And the reason being is that I was more involved with that, and she was more interested in hanging out, partying, being known, and all that other things. But it's ingrained in us that that we're supposed to be providers. We're supposed to look out for them, and that's basically what it is. My daughter, right now, my daughter is. I speak to her more than pretty much anybody else on this planet. Besides my lady, and it doesn't change. It doesn't end. It doesn't end for us. We continue to do these things. I don't. We don't see it as a chore. I think I can say that honestly. Neither one of you and myself, but we don't see that as a chore. It's a blessing. Having kids is a blessing, and it's unfortunate the way that they set up the system. It's set up so that way we are blocked from doing that to a certain extent. It's by design. Everything that you talk about, it's by design. Once you get in that system, it's meant to stop you from being that. So that way your kids don't grow up with a healthy type of vision of how a family is supposed to run. And that's a lot of what's wrong with a lot of people today. Women don't know how to speak to men because they don't have that person there, because it's more incentivized for the man not to be in the home than it is for him to be in the home or to be a part of it. And the only time that the woman would call upon me in particular was to discipline them or to get them to go along with whatever the plan or program it was that she was trying to run at that time. So I'm trying to keep it brief, but the subject is so broad. And my experience was so unique, I'll say. But after going through that, nobody really go through it.
I got you on that. I'm gonna ask Mr. Brooks and Grant this question. What are some of what were the challenges for you, essentially being a primary caregiver? Even though, Robert, you weren't technically, but you saying that you were doing quite a bit. I mean, what are the challenges when you're in that co-parenting situation and you're sort of playing that primary caregiver role? What are the challenges for you when the child is technically not in the home?
I mean, the challenges, I mean, I knew that there was information being fed to her from the other side that wasn't quite correct. And one of the biggest challenges was not to react to that, just to let the process play out. One of the things that I always believed is that eventually your child will see who everyone is. If you just stay the course and you just be yourself, at the end of the day, she'll see who you are, regardless of what she was told by some other people. And that was really the hardest part. And you know, everybody, and I didn't believe in everything she did or she believed in, but she believed she was doing it for the right reasons. But when you hit some of those walls where they absolutely believe that they're correct, and unfortunately you can see that they have a blocked worldview and they need to expand a little bit. When you hit those kind of things, she had sort of fallen back in with her family. She fell right back into her family role. She was the baby of the family. So now, her mother, who was in her 70s, is offering advice about parenting, and we didn't need that. We don't need two generations to go parenting. Like, shit has changed a lot in this country. Let's deal
Right.
with the current world as it is, not with the way she grew up for it to be. So that was, I had to say some unkind things about her mother every once in a while. That never goes over well. That burns a lot of bridges. But yeah, just trying to keep your cool. I was on a bus with two guys who were discussing divorce, and both of them have a good amount of resources. And one of them said, "It took me a while to figure out, but every time I got mad, it cost me money." And so I had to
Hmm.
stop letting her do that to me. I just realized, like, she could play me. She just said something, I reacted. She didn't like the way I reacted, so now she would press the button and I would get mad and it would cost me money. I had to grow up. And that's the just getting past the emotional reactions and the focus on what you want.
Those are the trigger words. Grant, same question for you. What was your situation like? When you're the primary caregiver, what are some of the challenges you being a man? And in your case, it was a daughter. You know, with a
Yeah,
boy, you can
both of them.
sometimes pop him upside the head, kick him in his backside, say, "Get your act together." But how is it with a,
Right.
with a daughter?
Nah. So with a little girl, man, it's a challenge because I'm just naturally not the nurturer that a little girl necessarily needs. But when you forced into that role, it has to come out somehow, right? So that's always been the biggest struggle for me, is just kind of allowing her to emote when she needs to, allowing her to see me be vulnerable, having those conversations with her. That's always been the biggest challenge with both of my daughters, not just with Lay. I mean, Ayana was the same when she was little. It was difficult for me. But with Ayana, I was fortunate because my mother was living in the house with us. Right. I since bought a different house, and now it's just Lay and I. So with Lay and I have to navigate a lot of that water by myself. And then the second thing is that when she goes, now that she's older, her mother has been more consistent on coming to see her, coming to pick her up on Friday or Saturday, spending the night, that kind of deal. So a lot of times when she comes home, there's a lot of recalibration that that has to take place. And my explanation to Layla was this: I said, "Look, you're gonna get in a lot less trouble if you just be the same kid, right? Be the same kid here as you are over there. I understand that the rules are different, and you can do things over there that you can't do here, but for your sake, you'll be better off if you just be who I want you to be, because you here the majority of the time, and that fantasy world that you in over there, where you run it, you know, that attitude coming here can cause a lot of pain." So those are probably the two biggest things, that the two deepest waters that I have to navigate right there.
That last one that you just talked about, that's the biggest complaint I hear from dads when they have joint custody, is the rules are different in each house, and the kids come back doing things in the other parent's house that they're not allowed to do in their house, and it's
Hmm.
it's very confusing. Not just,
Yeah.
I mean, for the child it's confusing, but if this is a cycle and it's like, say, every other weekend or something like that pops
Hmm.
up, that's hard to navigate, and deal with that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
got to be somewhat stressful on the father, you being
Yeah.
a
But
father in that situation.
so here's the thing though. So like so Leia's 9, right? So as a 9-year old, she just was at a birthday party, and she came back from the birthday party with an attitude. My daughter comes back from a birthday party with an attitude. So I'm like, "What's the problem?" And she says, "Well, such and such didn't really speak to me, blah blah blah, whatever, whatever." And I said, "Listen, you got to understand this. Like, as a 9-year old, knowing how to regulate your emotional intake and output is difficult, right? So this little girl that had the birthday party, she's on cloud 9, right? So maybe she's not as in touch with just being nice, because she's been getting all the attention all day. So nothing that she does has been wrong all day. So she ain't as in touch with, being your homie as she normally is. So just chalk it up to that, and try to have the emotional intelligence. And that's really what it boils down to, is teaching them to have that kind of emotional intelligence, and not to be emotionally fragile, as we are, now teaching our children to be. Most children are being taught to be, in my opinion, most children are being taught to be emotionally fragile. And I don't want her to be like that. I want her to be emotionally intelligent and be able to understand, hey, why do I feel like this? You know what I mean? Nobody should be able to make me feel any kind of way. So why am I feeling this way? And it's a difficult thing. I mean, but she's getting it. She's been getting it ever since she was born, because she's stuck here with me. And I say stuck because this is where you're gonna be, right? So you're gonna have to learn this. You're gonna have to learn this game that I'm giving you, in terms of being emotionally intelligent. And that's what allows me to keep the peace. Speaking of what Rob was talking about, with my oldest daughter's mother and with my young daughter's mother. In all situations, I try to keep the peace. I don't care what anybody says or what anybody does. I control how I react to it, and because it ain't gonna cost me no money. That's out, right?
Well
I
said. John, I want to wrap up with the same last question here. If you can keep it about 60 seconds or so. What have been your challenges once you essentially got primary custody or you had joint custody? What was the challenge for you? In your situation was different.
when somebody, we're talking about family dynamics here. This woman came from a family dynamic where her mother and father got married and divorced 2 times before I even met her. And then afterwards they got back together again. So, part of that whole dynamic was that a part of her always felt like that was going to be the norm and that we would split up and we would get back together. But I was like, no, we're not getting back together. That's not the dynamic. So it makes everything else more difficult because I'm trying to present a front that is a united front, and that's where those phone calls come in, where she could rely on me to make sure everything was straight. But there's another part of it that's like, well, he's never coming back. He's never going back into this situation. So that was difficult. And when I gained custody of my son the first time, I was living with another woman. And, then that's a different dynamic because now we're bringing my son into this house. And there's a little bit of, navigating that whole thing between her and them. And my feeling was the same. She had a daughter. Her daughter, when the first year we were together, her daughter wasn't living with her. They came together. I treated her daughter as if she was mine. And I did the same thing with my son simultaneously, but that wasn't reciprocated. And that was part of the reason why that relationship split up. So, all these dynamics because I'm not going to have somebody mistreating my child, or anything like that. So it's like none of these dynamics are good or clean or easy and everything when you're dealing with blended families and you're dealing with these different types of issues. Um, you just deal and everything and you just move on. And another part is that, like when you have this adversarial thing when you're not getting together and you know that you're not getting back together, then, then when my son would go spend time with his mom, it was nothing but toxic things coming out of her mouth. And I always made it a rule that I wouldn't say anything bad about my ex in front of my kids. That was just a rule with me. So she could be saying any type of crazy stuff, but I wasn't going to double down on that. So it's more of a problem. And as a result, my son is just really coming to it. He's 30 years old now. He's just really coming to the understanding of who his mother is and what issues. There was an issue that happened this weekend. It just happened this weekend that he just, so it doesn't end. So basically what you're doing is you're extending the childhood far past the time when it should be extended. And it's not easy. So it's like in many ways I'm not a parent. I've got an empty nest, but I still deal with the residual of what that relationship was like. When my daughter calls me up and tells me what happens, and my son calls me up and tells me another thing, I still have to keep it together. And I feel like I'll probably still be dealing with it for another 5 or 10 years. But hey, that's what the job of a parent is. We don't give up, we don't stop, and we just do what we have to do.
Absolutely. They never
Facts.
really move out. So they're sort of in a situation they're always going to be, dependent or relying on you in one way, shape, or form, even if they are out of the house. Well, we're about to wrap up. And I want to say thank you to all of our guests, Mr. John X, Mr. Robert Brooks, and Mr. Grant Lancaster for coming on and sharing their stories about child support system and what they went through. And if you want to get on our email list, there's always a link in the show notes. Just click on that website link. You can join the email list from there. All you have to do is leave your name and email address, and you'll be added. You'll get to know in advance what the next episodes will be about. And anytime we do anything live, such as Instagram Live, or we do a YouTube Live recording, you will have first dibs to know about that as well. There's an Instagram page. It's called The 313 Men, Money, Marriage, all one word crammed together, where you can find clips, pictures of previous guests on the Instagram page. And lastly, as I mentioned, the YouTube channel is The Men, Money, and Marriage Hour. And there are a few full-length episodes there, as well as some YouTube shorts. So with that being said, until we meet again, we are out.
More baby making music.
10 o'clock in the East. Time
That's
for
it.
smooth jazz.
There you go.